Welcome to the NextGen podcast, where we explore the next generation's perspective on the future of business. This podcast is powered by Commercient. You can learn more about integrating your ERP and CRM today at commercient.com.
So hi everyone, I'm Victoria Jenkins. I'm the content specialist here at Commercient, and I'm also one of the youngest members of the team. I'm a member of Gen Z. And Noah?
And I'm Noah Thomas. I'm the head of marketing and partnerships here at Commercient, and I'm part of the millennial generation.
And so today we're joined by Jennifer Schneider, the head solutions architect at Cheshire Impact, and also a 2020 marketing champion. Congrats on that award.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here today. So you told us a lot about you in the email that I sent back and forth. I mean, do you want to elaborate on some of the stuff that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the sales and marketing industry for 15 years. I'm a proud Gen X, but came through all of those pieces from sales and marketing. Today, in the architecture role, I help companies build tech stacks that align, use multiple platforms to do so, and also consult on that business strategy of alignment between marketing and sales.
Very cool. Very cool. And then also, I think it's cute how you added, aside from business, you love to travel, make masterpieces in the garden, and DIY projects.
Absolutely.
I mean, not much traveling right now, but hopefully.
Absolutely. I'm a homebody unless I'm on the road, and I live out in nature. So I live out in the middle of the country and love to garden and paint. And so those are the things that feed my soul, if you will.
That's so fun. So just jumping right into some of the questions that we wrote down. So let's start off with personalization. So in a general sense, let's talk about personalization. When would you consider a marketing campaign too personalized? And Noah and I have talked about this a bit, especially with the one example that he's brought up multiple times now about the target email chain. I'm not sure if you heard about that. You're good at explaining it, Noah. I don't know. You take that.
Well, so the example that I always give Victoria when it comes to personalization, or over personalization in this case, is the famous target email that they sent out to a young woman who had not yet told her parents that she was pregnant. And it was a bunch of ads for baby stuff. And her parents freaked out and demanded from Target why this was sent to her, only to find out that she was in fact pregnant. So it was definitely an interesting one. But, we talk about this all the time with personalization. We want to have personalized campaigns for our customers. We want it to speak to their personas. But when is it too far?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, my 2 points that I run into, and largely my experience is going to be from the B2B community and also as a consumer. So I take my personal experiences and I mix them with my B2B. And so the 2 things that really stand out to me is the obviousness of generic personalization. So there's things like dynamic content, and we're merging fields from our CRMs and our ERPs and things into our data. And it's just so obvious, right? Hello, Jennifer. You've been working at Cheshire Impact and you live here. I mean, we can spot it from a mile away. And so when marketers think that that's personalization, I think we miss the mark, especially because we do too much of it. You can obviously see where those little pieces of information have been kind of inserted into a very generic email. Another way that I see personalization too much is assumptions. Just because I live in Wisconsin and I'm a Gen X, there's so many assumptions about what I like and who I am and what I believe in. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later today, but demographic and gender assumptions based on very little information can really turn an audience off, as well as ruin your brand and perception within that community.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially, we get into this so much with geographic targeting. Mm-hmm. I think people get so overconsumed with generic targeting and they forget, and I mentioned this to Victoria too with personalization. It's like over time things change, of course, but a lot of personalization campaigns don't take that into account.
Absolutely.
So that's definitely an interesting one. Speaking of biases,
Yes.
How would you say you minimize unconscious bias in marketing campaigns? So, I talk about this a lot as being, a white male in business. I know that I have certain biases that maybe I'm not even aware of, unconscious biases. And how do you take steps to combat those?
It's an excellent question. I think if I'm totally honest, I think we're still figuring that out. I wish there was a rule book. I find myself always having to kind of step back and reflect and making sure that I'm including everyone in these conversations. Empathy goes a long way, and really just kind of asking questions. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking questions, and it's okay to not know. I think it's worse to assume. So based on those demographic and gender groups, you can look at a geographic area and assume that because 80% of that community maybe fits that mold, there's a 20% that doesn't, and maybe that 20% is your buying market or has other cultural influences and desires. And I think it's just really important to make sure that we're asking questions and we're bringing all of the generations at the table. So I kind of added a little note of like, what happened to crowdsourcing? But the piece of that was, it was really important for us to listen as marketers. And I'm not sure we're listening. We're so excited about getting this information because we can now, that I don't know if we're listening to it. I think we're just gathering it and then spitting it back out. So I guess my tips of that is to be empathetic, listen to others, and make sure that you have multiple folks in the room that come from different perspectives prior to launching that campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Sorry, no, what were you about to say?
I was going to ask, so, crowdsourcing, what happened to crowdsourcing, right? And I totally agree with that statement, but I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion that marketing research needs to be this long, drawn out thing where you sit people in a room and you ask them all these questions and you do, 15 focus groups. And yeah, that was super great if we were in the 80s, right? But now we have the whole new age of the internet. We have things like SurveyMonkey or even like a Google form that you can just blast out to an email base to get feedback. How do you see technology changing marketing resource and how does crowdsourcing fit into that for you?
I love that. So I'm a big component of SMS. And if you've heard of like geo-targeting, so you can go into Target and you go past a Quick Trip. I don't know if you guys know what a Quick Trip is, but in Wisconsin, it's kind of a big deal. So you drive past a Quick Trip and boom, hey, you want to save gas? Here's a coupon, things like that. So the ability to be able to ask really quick questions when you're in an area of an event or of a store or of a product, I think those type of ways of being able to let your audience speak to you can be a new way to crowdsource, especially, if we go off on the event tangent, if we ever get to have an event again. But small festivals, concerts, community events, even some type of protest events where we have a group of passionate people in a particular area, utilizing the tools that they use best right now. And today we're all glued to our phones. Perhaps that'll change in 10 years, not sure. But being able to let them have a voice while they're doing what they want to do in the environment in which they chose to be in. And so if we take all of those things into consideration and utilize those tools, I think we'll learn a lot more than we're learning without these long research patterns and kind of living by those stereotypes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good one. I had a question that had to do with personalization that's totally random and unrelated to this, but we are all glued to our phones, but we've all also become dependent on asking Alexa questions that we don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
We know that she's out there listening to us. Hi, Alexa. For everyone that I've set off their Alexas twice now.
I was just going to say, if you set her off, this is totally your fault.
Yeah, I have to tell Victoria to unplug hers all the time because I bring it up.
I don't have one now, but when I was at home, yeah.
So, a lot of people are really conscious of these new in-home devices and are like, oh, people are listening, or when is the mic on versus when is it off? Do you think there's a world in which there's a non-creepy way to personalize advertising through those at-home devices? Because obviously, like if I said, hey, I'm hungry, and Alexa said, Uber Eats has a $10 discount, I think that I would kind of be concerned at that point.
Right.
But is there a cultural norm or change that may happen, do you think?
Victoria, you had something?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say I had actually an even creepier experience recently. So I have been looking at getting an espresso machine for my kitchen just because I like espresso and I miss having an espresso machine at home. And so I Googled, I went on Facebook Marketplace and looked for one. And the next day I got an Amazon pop up just from the Amazon app saying, "Oh, we think you'd like a new espresso machine. Here are our top 5 picks." Like, I wasn't even on Amazon. Like, that is, I feel like that's way too far in terms of personalization. That's quite creepy.
No, it's great. Those two stories are perfect. I think my answer to that is there a non-creepy way? No, I think it's all about the desensitization of us. So I got my first Alexa a long time ago as part of the original beta, and now she's a part of the family. And when she interrupts a conversation or a TV show, I'm like, "Hey, I'm not even talking to you. Be quiet." And so I've desensitized to the point where I know she's listening. I'm like, if you think my life's that interesting, listen away. Is that the right answer? Probably not. Um, and so I think what we really have to think about is making sure that we control as marketers, as IT professionals, as AI inventors. I think it's our job to make sure that we have morality in what we do, because we are already shaping the society to accept things that probably are not acceptable because they're just in our face over and over. And we can't expect the community all the time to maybe know what's right or wrong, because they might not understand how we're collecting the information. We might just joke that Alexa heard that, or I was talking to you about the espresso machine, my phone was listening, and all of a sudden I have the ad on Amazon. We say it because we're in the industry and we're like, yeah, it's crazy. But you want to talk to somebody who's not in the industry, that would really scare the crap out of them. And so I think more responsibility needs to be held up at that level of creation. And then we'll talk more about this later, but I think education is something that we're drastically missing within this. Do you want to know how your information is being collected, and how you can prevent it and how you can allow it? We need so much more of that so that people are not caught off, are not blindsided, and can actually trust their brands and even their families and their companies that they're passionate about.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think there's also a point when I think even governments need to get involved and
Oh, absolutely.
the laws, of course, around
Absolutely.
marketing. Yeah. And that's just something that's not happening right now is we
Regulations.
see, yeah, a lot of policymakers are older or just aren't, a lot just don't care. So I think that's somewhere. I did see a couple weeks ago, I don't know if we can include this in the podcast if it's too political, but I just want to mention AOC had some sort of thing in the House about restricting advertisements on Twitch because it was found that a lot of between boys between the ages of like 9 and 14, 15 were getting ads on games like Call of Duty, war type games
Sure.
about enrolling in the military. It's like at the age of 10, that's really unethical in many ways. So she brought that into the government and talked about stricter legislation around that. But I think there's definitely a long way to go because, as I was going to say, a lot of these people in government right now are just too old to understand
Well, they're
personally
not
all of
part
the
of,
ins and
they
outs.
might not be using it, and that might be a
Yeah.
part of it. And another factor that you bring up is how do you do something when you notice something? So you notice something that bothers you. I wouldn't know where to begin, in what channels to access to be able to voice my opinion, where to get support. I'd probably go back to some form of social media, which then is also being tracked again, right? So I think we need to create channels and places and safe places for people to be able to communicate that are connected with, like you said, those type of leaders that have a passion and a voice. So I'm excited for a little bit of fresh meat, so to speak, in some of those roles to make some of these issues top of mind.
Yeah, and while we're talking about current events, as it sits now, we're approaching the end of October. So there's currently a lawsuit out with Google, and talking about possibly taking Google out, or at least letting some of these smartphone manufacturers have options to select. A lot of people don't realize, but the way that we're tracked by default with our Safari browsers is that Google is the backend search engine that runs in that. And that's a lot of the way that we get tracked is by Siri using Google and those kinds of things. Do you, obviously it's impossible to predict the future, but I wonder what would happen just as an open question, if Google does end up losing the lawsuit and we do have choices in our smartphone, and going back to the education part of the general public, not us marketers that maybe are involved in Google Ads and know how extreme the targeting can get, and know the options that are available to us, um, how does that change? How does that change marketing? How does that change personalization from your perspective?
Well, I think we're going to see some pretty heavy hitters get involved there, unfortunately, and put us, get in the middle of that because their livelihoods rely on that type of information gathering. To to be straight up, but I think I think that it's very important. I think it's very important for us to understand the ways that we're being tracked. I think if more people knew and more people had a voice, we would be able to do a little bit more about it. I know that even with my cell phone, I go through all of my apps and I turn off all of those features or only allow while using app. But many of us have hundreds of apps on our phone and lose track of it, and it doesn't take precedence. And so when things like this happen, we unfortunately don't have a leg to stand on because they're like, well, you never turned off the setting. Another thing that we're seeing with Google Chrome is the switch from third-party to first-party cookies. And so I think some things are improving, but not enough. I'm not sure that it's going to make the impact that we might want it to. I'm not sure how far down the path we are, because if what we know today is this much, I feel like there's just so much more that we're unaware of. And so it almost scares me to think about the ways that we are being tracked that we don't know. And so it's a really good question to bring up to all generations. And I think we need to continue to bubble it up.
Yeah. Yeah, so switching gears out of, before we get into paranoia
Right.
territory, but to right the ship here, getting back to personalization, although these two things, they go just so hand in hand, and it's almost impossible to talk about them or not talk about them. How does personalization vary on service-based versus product-based campaigns? You as a marketer working at Cheshire Impact, I'm assuming that you get to work on a plethora of different businesses, products, services. So part of the podcast and us being younger generations is millennials may be switching roles, looking at going into a different industry. Like, I'm in a service-based business now, but I'd like to get into products. Or with Victoria's generation, looking at, what industry do I want to get into? So can you maybe talk to both of those a little bit?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is the delivery between the two. So if you're a current client versus new and it's a service type, it's going to appeal to a deficiency or a need, a deficiency that you have within your company, within your lifestyle, and the need that you have to fill that. And when we start switching to product, a lot of times product is going to be much more personalized without being personal. So it's going to appeal to that frenzy of like, I want that. I have to have that. I have to have that either for my company or for myself. You see a lot of that in consumer goods. I have to have that. And so the marketing is extremely different and the personalization is different. So from a service point, we're going to personalize it by pointing out your deficiency. And from a product, we're going to personalize that as, look at all the other people that have that and how well they're doing. And it's not it's not cut always like that, but I just think that larger percentages between the two, you'll see those type of themes more often.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the next question we had here, how has personalization and marketing strategy in general changed between the two generations, between millennials and Gen Z? And then any thoughts on where you think it might be headed?
Yeah, absolutely. Try not to go on a rabbit hole with this one, but if we talk about channels, we have some pretty consistent channels. I haven't seen anything like earth-shatteringly different between the two generations. I do definitely see a decline in email association, but there's a couple of reasons for that. One, just getting into the workforce, the research capabilities, or not capabilities, but the research focus maybe isn't quite there yet. So things like newsletters and product slicks and things like that. As you develop more and more into your career, you're going to be tasked with following and consuming that type of content. So I think we see generally that Gen Z are less apt to email, but I think part of that, again, like I said, is career based. I do feel like the communities and the shifts that we have. So emails as far as business and research, but when there's an email that's well crafted, and I think that design is absolutely much more important to Gen Z and even millennials than necessarily Gen X. When we have a well-crafted email that speaks to us visually and tells a story and is a part of a community, we're going to see more interaction from millennials and Gen Z because they are, and we are, actually, I shouldn't say they are, we are as a human community across the globe getting shorter and shorter with our attention spans. And you need to catch me. And usually you're going to catch me visually, and then I'm going to take the time to invest. And so while we're changing that way globally in all generations, I think millennials and Gen Z are kind of perfecting that. They're very specific on what they want. And so that's helping shape better, more relevant, and I think more impactful content, especially from a visual standpoint. But one of the things when we talk about personalization, it's funny because we can use the good old fashioned marketing case study of Harley Davidson, right? In that sense of community and how well they did that. But I think the brands that I see that are really starting to take hold of the newer generations are absolutely more authentic. They're not following this kind of standard boilerplate that other businesses have. They have this unique environment and community, and it's okay if you don't want to be a part of that. It's a total shift in marketing, right? We've marketed in the past, making it as vanilla as possible so we could get the entire masses. And now we're seeing companies saying, this is our niche, these are our people, and this is what we believe. And we're cool if you don't want to join. So I think that's a shift that we're going to see that we haven't in the market. And I think it's going to continue to move down that path. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think you're totally right, especially when it comes to niche targeting. When especially I know when I go look at brands and I go look for things that I want, I look more for things that are really specific. Like I recently purchased a water bottle, and the reason I bought the water bottle was because it had, a piece of marketing attached to it that said that they're more responsible and they recycled the top of the plastic of their lids.
Right.
And that was something that I cared about when I was
Yep.
purchasing water bottles, and I chose to pay more money for it because that's what I wanted to buy. I was buying it to not drink out of plastic water bottles. I think that you're definitely right in that respect. And then also, getting to communities and personalization, right? How, what successful brands have you seen, or maybe not successful brands in particular, but how have you seen the successful brands push forward with their communities and using their personalization for that?
Absolutely. I think the successful brands that are doing that are using their communities as stories. They're introducing those people, like meet Janet, and meet Janet's family. Um, you know, we're going to introduce you to her heritage, to things that are important to her, to recipes that her family's generation has handed down, to her craft that she's learned, her unique skill set and beautiful things that she creates, and let's understand why she creates them. You become invested in the people within that community, and then that community becomes invested in you, and it just starts to organically spread. So I think that's really important. We're highlighting the people versus the service or the product, and we're understanding the passion behind it, and we get invested. We want to support them. We want to be a part of that movement. I think one other piece that I wanted to mention too of the difference between millennials, Gen Z, and maybe even Gen X, and kind of where it's headed is, I think the loyalty to brands is something that is kind of starting. I want to say it's starting to go away, but it's shifting, right? So we have that authenticity that we belong to, but as soon as that company becomes unauthentic, we're out. Whereas Gen X and baby boomers and other generations, hey, it's Tide. I use Tide. That's how I wash my clothes. Or, that's just very, very brand loyal because it's what we always did. And then just stopped thinking, stopped researching, stopped understanding what the company stands for, and just bought that same product every week after week after week. So I think the challenge for new companies and marketers is to not be authentic for that first day, but continue that message and grow and let your community develop your brand so that you don't become stagnant, because people will jump off. And that's not something a lot of large corporations ever had to deal with before.
Yeah. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's largely a result of social media. I mean, you follow those brands, and then all of a sudden they post something that's, not what you expected, and you go, hold on, no, 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 and then you
Right?
remember that. It really jumps out because it's inauthentic, like you said, and it varies from that brand voice that you're used to hearing. And the second that happens, it's like a switch flips, and you go, nope. Time to exit the hype train for this product and be done.
Sure. Yeah.
And
And I
I
think
know.
also, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, no.
Okay, no, I was going to say also, myself as a member of Gen Z, I look for brands with transparency. So, for example, I moved to London recently and I had to buy a coat because I lived in Florida. Couldn't just go into a store and buy a jacket. So I ordered one online and I searched for a specific company that showed me the factory where it's made, who made the coat, what it's made of, where those materials were sourced. So it's super ethical and eco-friendly, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just that transparency overall. But I would say even then, companies, for example, Reformation, a very transparent company, they tell you all about where your stuff is made, if it's recycled, etc. Even then, there was one sketchy post at one point from the founder, and yeah, a lot of people stopped buying from them for that reason. And I think that's just a generational difference. Like Gen Z, if something doesn't agree with us, we will not continue to support that product because we see the product as both the product and everything the company stands for. Whereas I feel like older generations are like, well, they stand for bad things, but they make good soap, so we should still,
Well, exactly. You nailed it. You nailed it.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot about B2C here, but how do you think that this impacts B2B businesses? As the workforce starts to mature, as millennials, start to become in their 40s and 50s and take over C-level executive roles, do you see this shifting in B2B?
Well, right now we're going through what we call B2B to C because, acronyms are fun.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the methods of marketing in B2B take on B2C qualities because our consumers consume that information in different ways now. As far as the loyalty and the brand recognition, I think it's a much longer journey with the B2B versus the B2C because I think we still compartmentalize, not everyone, but we still compartmentalize our work from our personal life. So if I'm working for a company and they're a partner with this company, I'm probably not going to spend my entire day researching that other company to kind of see what they stand for because, and because for them it's a partnership and there's other things at the table, right? The products or services have synergies and their customers are asking for it, and those are the thoughts that whirl in your brain versus being at home and saying, I'm going to consume this product, but I want to make sure that I have less of a footprint, right? I don't think that it's not going to happen. I just think that it's going to be much slower. I also think that depending on the size of the company, so my representation there was like an enterprise B2B. I think our smaller B2Bs are already doing that. They're taking the B2C approach and they're making sure that anyone we work with has the similar culture, has the similar beliefs, and they're working together to do a lot of philanthropy and community events. But that's going to be more your SMB market because they have the ability to do that. Once companies get to an enterprise level, there's so much more red tape. There's so many people that have to approve things and there becomes more limit. There's many people telling you what to say, what to do. We have to watch all of this. And so it's easier to just shut the door and not engage at all. Because if we have 5,000 to 10,000 employees, we can't possibly train them all to support our brand and culture if, 100 of them go AWOL. So we're just not going to address that. I'm not saying that that's the right way either, but that's just what I'm seeing. Hopefully we can continue to bubble up and do more influencing, because I think more of the enterprise companies did more of the authentic pieces, we would have a much better world. And there are some that do. There are some that are outstanding in what they do, but it's, a 1 to 100 ratio. And those are the things that are kind of controlling our world and our press, and hold a lot of money in this world. So I think it's something that needs to happen, but I don't see it happening as quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good point. I mean, it all starts with B2C, right? It starts with you. It starts with the consumer caring. With Victoria looking up things about the factory that she's buying the coat from, and voting with your dollar, right? Wasn't that the big phrase in
Yep.
business school? Vote with your dollar. You don't like something a company does, just don't do. Don't buy from them. And that we see that perpetuated big time in both of our generations. So I think that's something that you're right. It's going to take time. It's going to take a long time for that to shift.
Absolutely.
So then, moving now into our last question. So we talked a little bit about this before, but ethical data collection and especially with personalization. So how much data do you think is too much to collect? Because of course you need a certain amount of data to personalize an ad campaign well, but is that just too much data in the end? Is it a bit creepy? What are your thoughts?
It's tough because we love being understood. We love getting things customized for us. If we can click on a website, make our own shoe, and choose our own colors, and I mean, it doesn't matter. We want to customize it all for us. The industry's always been that way. And we're getting even more customization friendly. When companies would only make 4 widgets that were blue, red, black, and gray, now you have the variety of colors and you can choose them. Um, I don't think it's funny because it's really a cyclical approach. People don't realize how much data it takes to have that experience. So you talked about the Alexa experience, saying I'm hungry. Decor and fashion. You'll see ads. When I start purchasing things from ads, I'm now seeing way cooler shirts and pants, and a watch thing that's leather and boots with fur on the top. And all of a sudden my experience is I'm just seeing the coolest things that I love, because the more I purchase and the more I interact with those ads, the more they understand what my style is. And now all I'm seeing is things that I want. So I don't think we understand what kind of data is being collected. So what is too much? I don't know. I think we need to be okay with things not being customized. If we don't want as much data being collected, we have to do some research. We have to look on our own and find the brands that we love. So we can't have it both. We can't have everything coming to our door and then not want our data taken, because we're going to need some levels of that. So I think it's a great question. I'd like to put it back to you guys, because again, I'm from Gen X. From you guys, from a Gen Z and millennial, what particular pieces of data are you guys finding that are just absolutely unacceptable?
Yeah. I could take the question first, Victoria, and
Sure. Yeah,
you
I'm
can go
thinking
after.
about it.
So I think for me, it's more about the locus of control. Like, can I control the data impact? Can I restrict the certain pieces of data that get sent out? Um, I think the things I don't like are when I do something privately, like for instance, if I am having a conversation and then something out of that conversation appears in an ad, that is when I start getting really uncomfortable, right? Like we just talked about. And I often pose this question to my significant other, and she her big thing is always don't say it in front of the Alexa, or put your phone in your pocket, because we don't want ads for this. We're recently looking at making like a big TV purchase, and so she was like, oh, don't say it in front of the phone, joking. um,
Right.
but I mean, it is one of those things that it clearly pops up over and over and over again. But you're right in the fact that I do want things personalized to me, right? I don't want to go on to Amazon and the first 6 things there be flower pots and all this random stuff that I personally don't care about, living in an apartment where I'm not able to go plant things, right? So I think that's one of those things. The biggest thing that I don't like is selective targeting. So
Mhm.
when I get niched into a corner of, oh, you're a white male, you must be a Republican that wants to go get a house or something. It's like, no, 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 no. The targeting's wrong. I don't, I don't
Right.
necessarily like all of these things, but it just has to do more, I think, when you get put in a box that you don't want to be put in. So I don't know what data controls that really. So going back to your initial input there, which was, we don't really know what data is being collected on us at the end of the day. We as marketers know 20% of it, maybe more than the general population, but we still all know in the back of our minds
Right.
there's that 80% that's coming from somewhere.
It's that
Um,
listening. That
yeah,
listening. That's if I say you can listen, listen. If
yeah,
I didn't give you permission to listen, you can't listen.
don't.
But did I accidentally give you permission to listen because I didn't read fine print somewhere? We need much more clear guidelines. We
Yeah.
need much more direction and education. You can't, it's not fair to put us in that situation as consumers and humans and say, well, you didn't read page 57 of that, thing. Like, no, you need to call that out. We need to make guidelines that call out, here's how your information is being gathered. Here's when we listen. Here's when we don't. Do this if you don't want that. And that should be on page one.
Yeah.
So Victoria, what were you going to say?
My thoughts are quite similar to yours, Noah. I want to control what data is being collected. And I mean, personally, right now, whatever idea companies like Instagram have of me, it's completely wrong. They think I'm some like middle-aged woman living in Central Florida. So I get all these ads about like buying a house or buying a kayak. I'm like, where am I going to kayak? I live in the middle of the city.
It's okay. I get Medicaid at least 3 times a day now. And I'm like, I know that I'm 42, but I have a little more time before AARP needs to be knocking on my door. Give me some credit, right?
You're gonna get nursing home ads any day now.
Oh yeah, I actually got a thing in the mail the other day for one of those stairs thingies that goes up the stairs. I'm like,
Oh
I don't even
wow.
have stairs, and I want, so thank you. But yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a question of what data are they collecting to think that I'm a middle-aged woman in Central Florida? But then, yeah, also with listening, just if I could know when my phone is listening to me, that would be nice. It's pretty much all the same things. And then also, this just made me think of I think it was back in the 80s or the 70s. I don't remember. My dad told me about this a while ago. There was an ad campaign for Coca-Cola. I'm not sure if this was just in South Africa, but it may have just been in South Africa. They would take an image of like a nice, Coke with like the straw, nice glass, whatever, and flash it for a couple milliseconds during a TV show. And then during the ad roll, in between episodes or something, they would have an ad for Coke. And thus your brain would recognize it. You wouldn't recognize the image. And then you'd be like, okay, I'm craving a Coke. Let me go get a Coke. And so that was eventually
Yeah.
deemed illegal. It's like, well, now our phones are literally listening to what we're saying, and like me saying, oh, I want a coffee right now. I don't want an ad for that. That's about the same level of scariness. Yeah, there just needs to be more legislative stuff on this. I think that's the solution right now.
I agree.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. As we all, currently recording this in October, and all of us being Americans, or in Victoria's case, expat in another
It's
country
still
right now,
very
but
American, don't
very,
worry.
still very, very American. We're all thinking towards the election cycle in the back of our heads, whether we like it or not, right? But I think all of this really comes down to personalization being, when is it right for the consumer as marketers, and then where do you draw the line ethically, right? Like
Mhm.
where is too far? And
Absolutely.
I remember the first time I ever logged into Google Analytics, when I very first started my career in marketing, and I saw hobbies and interest. It's this little section in Google Analytics. It actually only picks up like 0.05% of your actual data. But I just remember thinking, how creepy is this that we know that there are people that are into like fishing versus people that are into like looking up office or like home furniture, or
Mhm.
people that are into home and garden. It hasn't quite gotten to the level of like, how many pets I have yet. But it's still, it's still in that level, in that vein of creepiness. The thing that also gives me really wary, I think, in my data collection is when it's clearly something that someone has either stored on me, like remembers that I
Yeah.
have this. So like we have two dogs, or we had two dogs. One of them we just recently had to put down, but it was a smaller dog. And the smaller dog, I get ads all the time for smaller dog stuff. And it's like, this has been several months now, and you still remember that I have a smaller dog. So somewhere in a database, you have that I have two dogs,
Mhm.
and it's stored somewhere. So I think this, not only just the locus of control, if I want to be able to turn it on and off, but I want to know where it is and what you have, right, are also two other pieces of the whole data collection personalization element too.
Yeah, I mean, the sharing of data technically is has been regulated. Or we've been told it's been regulated, but it was common practice for years for companies
Yeah.
to share database information. And I'm not 100%, convinced that it's not still happening. And you still see when you sign up, you'll get the 3 check boxes. Can we share this with our third party? Blah, 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 blah. And if you're in a hurry and you don't read, it technically is your fault. You could not catch that and uncheck those boxes. So I think the moral of today's story is, at least in my mind, personalization is going to continue. Data collection is going to continue. We need more regulations. We need a ton more education. And as a consumer, I think the message to the consumer, no matter what generation you are, is take the time to read before you click through items when you're downloading an app. Just things for your local grocery store, your Target, your Walmart, whatever that is, you're downloading those apps because they make things convenient. Before you switch through all of that just to get it set up, make sure you're doing the reading and you have that understanding. When we lack education, we also get complacent and we just allow things to happen. And I think that's kind of how we got to this point. We haven't had a ton of people be super passionate about this. And a lot of that is because of that lack of education. I think if more people understood, I think more people will be involved. So I love that you guys are bringing this to the forefront and that you've let an old Gen X join your party. But it's just been a really great episode. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. And also check your Wi-Fi settings, people. I don't know if anybody's listening to this, but before you walk into Target, don't get on guest Wi-Fi.
Oh,
It's
that's
terrible.
fantastic. We're
Yeah.
just gonna create a nice little frenzy of paranoia about this
Yeah.
pack, hot pack.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the hard thing about personalization for me, is like, as a marketer, like, yeah, personalization is great, and you want to talk to people about what they're passionate about, and you want to get in front of them and make sure that your voice and your message as a company is being heard. But of course, the consumer part of me also says, yeah, but I want it to be done ethically. I want it to be
Mhm.
done the right way.
Right.
So meet me. You got to meet them in the middle somehow, right? There's got to
Absolutely.
be a middle ground. So
I love that.
yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for coming. I want to make sure that I call out a couple things that you gave us ahead of time. You can find Jennifer at Jen Talk Tech to Me. That's a
Yeah.
good handle.
Thank you.
On Twitter. On LinkedIn, you can find her at Jennifer Lynn Schneider. Did I get that right?
You got it. You
I
did.
got
You
it.
did
Okay, I
well.
did. And you can, of course, also find her on her wonderful podcast. Is it Pardot or Pardo?
Pardot.
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 Pardot
Pardot. Pardot.
Life
Pardot.
Hacks. Pardot Life Hacks. And that's at www.pardotlifehacks or on your favorite podcasting app. We'll put links to those, of course, in the show notes. Um, of course, we need to mention Commercient Sync, what it does. It's capable of integrating ERP and CRM. You can find Commercient Sync at commercient.com and let your salesperson know that you have promo code podcast7.
And thank you for listening to the NextGen podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you're listening, just so that you never miss an episode. And you can always find more NextGen podcast content on all of the commercial social channels at Commercient. Links to those in the show notes. And thank you again for being here, Jennifer. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Loved it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.